Good morning. As Alexis said, I am Tara Watkins. I am an Extension Associate in the Department of Horticulture with UK. And before I get started talking about the Kentucky Cut Flower Calendar, I'm going to do a little bit of a plug real quick. Cut Flower Extension with UK is just kind of coming onto the radar with more of a focus being put on it. And so I am now with Cut Flower Extension, and we are putting out what we're calling a grower survey or a needs assessment survey. Alexis has those, and she is going to be passing them out. If you're a current or working on getting started cut flower production and you want one of these surveys, please raise your hand. It's a paper copy, and you can work on filling it out during lunch or throughout the rest of the day, whenever, and you can get it back to myself. I'll be floating around here the rest of the day. Alexis will as well, and so will Kristen. She will be moderating the second half of the day. I'm going to go to the, let me hop to the end real quick here, because I was going to talk about this at the end, but changed my mind. So this survey, like I said, this is a survey to kind of get a sense of what Kentucky cut flower producers need from UK Extension. What kind of resources and educational programming and things of that nature can we provide to you guys that will be the best use of our time and the most benefit to you all? So I just put a couple of these questions up here as an example. What are some of your primary production concerns and also some of your primary business concerns, whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned grower? How do you prefer to receive some of this educational programming? Do you like coming to things like this? Do you like virtual webinars? Do you like fact sheets that can be found online, looking at social media links, just all sorts of different things? Give us your opinion. And then we also have a series of questions that involve a startup of a cut flower organization for the state of Kentucky. So if you think that something like a professional organization such as the Kentucky Vegetable Growers Association that's here would be useful for Kentucky's cut flower growers, and you have opinions on that, that's in the survey. Please fill it out. I do want to also mention that the survey is confidential. It will not leave the ears and eyes of myself and our extension team. Your responses will never be discussed with other growers or anything like that. So just please realize it's confidential, and you can skip any question on the survey if you'd like as well. So I just wanted to go over that real quick, and like I said, please fill that out throughout the day and get that back to myself, Alexis, or Kristen. And now we will actually get started. All right. So a month and a half or so ago, I was approached about doing this talk, and they said, we want you to talk about the Kentucky Cut Flower Calendar. And I was like, ooh, like that's a cool topic. Like, that's really useful. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, that's a lot. You know, we're talking about an entire year. And for those of us who have been growing, there's a lot to do in a year. There's a lot to do even in the off season. How on earth do you fit that into a 25-30 minute talk, right? So with that being said, I'm gearing this a little bit more towards some of our beginner growers today, and maybe some of our intermediate growers as well that are adding new aspects to their cut flower operation. So I pretty much already said this. Like I said, I am now working with cut flowers in UK Extension. I was hired on last year to do nursery crops. In a year, Christmas trees and cut flowers has also been added to my docket because, fortunately for the state of Kentucky, the Horticulture Council in UK has realized the importance of these industries. So, all right, the never-ending to-do list. Am I right? If you feel like this, or if you feel like this, or like this sometimes, and you're really trying to get started and you just have no idea where to go, hopefully some of these things that I talk about today will give you guys a good foothold and a starting point to at least be able to ask more questions. So all of us want to get plants in the ground, right? That's the goal. We got to get plants in the ground to get flowers. But before you can get anything in the ground, you have to have your hands on something, right? And so a lot of people don't realize that a lot of either seeds, corms, bulbs, tubers, whatever it is that you're wanting to put into your operation it has to be ordered well in advance. This is a big thing. We're talking about spring bulbs and corms, for example, tulips, ranunculus, anemones. A lot of times when the tulips are blooming in April and May, it's time to start placing your orders with some of those wholesale companies for next year. So you got to really think in advance and be thinking about what you want to grow, the color schemes of what you want to grow, the quantities of what you want to grow, and you have to start getting those orders in advance. Now, I will say, even if you put that order in May, your order won't necessarily always be confirmed until more towards the end of the summer, because a lot of times, again, I'm going to use tulips for example, we have to wait and see how the tulip bulb harvest goes in Holland. And so once they have some concrete numbers for availability, then you'll be able to get back with that wholesaler, and they'll be able to tell you what, if you order 500, maybe they can only get you 400, for example. But be thinking well in advance about these things. Again, same with anemones and ranunculus. Dahlias, as Melanie mentioned earlier, dahlias are very popular. There's kind of a dahlia craze, and it's seen in both cut flower producers and hobby growers and just backyard landscape and gardener enthusiasts. The big thing is there's both spring and fall sales, but with the dahlia craze that's going on right now, a lot of times you need to order your tubers in the fall, even though they won't be planted until next year. Now, most of the time when you do order your tubers in the fall, they won't ship until the spring. So you don't have to worry about overwintering and storing those tubers. But you do need to be thinking ahead and planning ahead on, again, what varieties, quantity, and those sorts of things. Seeds. Seeds are generally available year-round, but if you want the best selection of the varieties, the series of snapdragons you want, the colors of stock that you want, you really need to think about ordering months in advance so that you can ensure that you get whatever it is that you want and need for your operation. If you're not starting seeds on your own and you're ordering plugs in from a broker, you also need to order those well in advance. Again, we're talking months in advance. So if you're fall planting things, you need to order months in advance of that. If you're ordering plugs for spring and summer planting, well in advance of that. So just something really important to be aware of. You don't want to be caught and be like, oh no, I can't even get what I want now. And then perennials, they can generally be ordered and planted year-round, but a lot of species, it's best for them to be fall planted. So we're going to kind of make this a sort of a calendar theme. We're going to start in the spring. Tulips, again, they're a welcome spring sight. But tulips don't start in the spring. They start in the fall and early winter. So when you plant tulip bulbs, you're planting them in that time frame. A lot of people plant their tulip bulbs in late October and sometimes into November, in that general time frame. Really, if your ground is not frozen and you have the time, put them in. It's okay if it's December. Me. And also something to think about with tulips is that there's early, mid, and late spring blooming varieties. So when you're placing that order, keep that in mind if you want to maximize the tulip blooming window. Early tulips can generally bloom late March and early April. Late tulips are generally bloomed by Mother's Day, and again, this is very weather dependent on your spring. And there's mid-season varieties that fit in between there as well. Another cool thing with tulips and something to plan for, especially when you're marketing those tulips, is tulips can be pulled with the bulb on and stored with a bulb if you have cooler space. And generally, and it's dependent on variety, but tulips can generally be stored for 1 to 3 weeks in the cooler. So that's something to keep in mind and kind of plan for with what you're planting, and also colors for Easter, colors for Mother's Day, and your marketing techniques for that as well. So we're going back to fall, but we're looking at fall anticipating spring planted flowers. So not every farm has fall hardy annuals on their in their operation. That's okay. But if you do want to do some fall planted hardy annuals, something you need to think about is, what is your infrastructure? Do you have a high tunnel, or do you have the resources or labor to set up low tunnels, which are pictured here. If you're doing fall planted hardy annuals, most of them need to be planted anywhere from early October to mid-November. Again, there's some flexibility on that, but it's really important that if you are doing these fall hardy annuals, that you get them in the ground while the weather is still nice, so that they can get a good root establishment, because that is what is the primary factor, in addition to some covering that helps them along. But that's the primary factor that's going to allow them to make it through the winter. So make sure when you're planning this out, if you're doing fall plants, you get your plugs in or you start your seeds early enough to where you can have your plants in the ground for a good rule of thumb is about a month for most things to get good root establishment before the really cold weather starts to set in. And again, you should have some sort of protection ready to go for when winter does hit. Okay, we're back to spring. It's time to get down and dirty. As soon as the ground is workable in the spring, which we live in Kentucky, the ground's workable 1 minute, it's not workable the next, right? But as soon as that ground is workable, even if you know it's gonna freeze again, go ahead and start getting those beds ready. If you're breaking new ground, it's really important to do that early. It's not optimal to break ground and plant something in it the next week. There's a lot of weed pressure that you might see. If you're gonna break new ground and it's sod, for example, solarize that. That's one method that you can kill the grass and get the ground ready for planting. You can use silage tarps or other ground coverings. Just make sure it's opaque. It's ideal to begin this even the previous year and leave that tarp on over the winter and everything. But 3 to 4 months you can do well with. A week, not so much. So be thinking about that. Then you have to prep your beds. Once ground is broke, you have to actually prep your beds. And everyone's operation is going to look a little bit different. You might be a no-till operation. You might till. You might add in compost. You might add in amendments such as different fertilizers or other organic amendments. And then you have to think about if you have irrigation in your field or tunnel. You have to set up that irrigation. If you're growing with weed barrier, you have to put down that weed barrier. There's a lot to it, and all that has to be done before a single plant can go in the ground. Be thinking ahead. Spring planted hardy annuals. If you still want to plant cool flowers, but you don't want to take the time or don't have the labor or the infrastructure to try to overwinter them, you can plant many of them in very early spring or late winter. It's mostly the same concept as fall planted annuals. You still need to have some sort of covering structure for them. That may look like just frost cloth, or you may have some added plastic as seen in this photo on there. It's really dependent upon what you're growing, the plant's hardiness zone, and when you're putting them in the ground. So these, like I said, we're just kind of skimming the surface. There's so much to talk about, but these are things to hopefully get your mind cranking and come up with a list of questions that you can research or ask. And again, work when you can work the ground, because you never know what Kentucky weather will bring. More spring flowers. We're just going to quickly touch on ranunculus and anemones because they're a very popular high-value spring flower. Infrastructure availability. What do you have? You really have to have something that will allow you to cover at minimum ranunculus. And they really need some covering. High tunnels versus low tunnels. We kind of already talked about fall planted versus spring planted. As Melanie mentioned earlier, generally fall planted plants will produce with a little bit more vigor. You'll have higher yield. Sometimes you'll have longer and stronger stems or even bigger bloom size. So think about some of these things and what is feasible for your operation. Just because it's possible doesn't mean you have to do it. You have to do what works for you. Both are cool weather crops. As Melanie mentioned, when it gets too hot, ranunculus, anemones as well, they will shut down. So it's very important that you get these plants into the ground on time in late winter or early spring. Peonies. I wanted to touch on peonies as well because they're a very popular high dollar cut flower. They can be planted just about any time of the year, but I would never advise that. If you're handed a peony root, I wouldn't tell you to go throw it in the garbage, but try to plan for your peony roots to be planted in the fall. In Kentucky, bloom time for those peonies is generally in May-ish, and there are, again, just like tulips, early to late season blooming varieties. So that's something to take into account when you're making your crop plan for the year. Peonies as well can be dry stored for about 2 to 4 weeks, variety dependent. So again, something to keep in mind. All right, now we're going to talk about seed starting. A lot of beginning farmers want a seed start because, when you order plug trays, you don't need 200 of one thing of one color, right? So seed starting is a good way to kind of cope with that, and also it teaches you a lot. So there's traditional plug trays, there's soil blocking, there's spring seed starting, and then there's summer and fall seed starting. Again, what do you want to do in your operation? If you're looking at the back of seed packets and you're relatively new to this, you'll oftentimes see the terms after last frost and as soon as the soil can be worked. Generally, as soon as the soil can be worked means late winter, early spring, when the ground is not frozen. These plants can go in and they can handle some light freezes and frosts, generally with some protection as well. After last frost generally means don't plant it until after last frost date or the weather looks clear, because frosts, they are tender annuals, which means they will be damaged by frosts and freezes. An example that you might see on the back of a seed packet, it might say 4 to 6 weeks before planting time. So that's when you need to sow those seeds to give them time to germinate and grow to a proper growth stage to be planted into the ground to give them the best chance at life and producing for you. 2023 last frost date here in Bowling Green this year is predicted to be April 11th. So that's generally what you want to go back on. If the seed packet says 4 to 6 weeks before last frost, count back from that last frost date generally, and that's when you need to start your seeds. Make sure to account for germination time. Some seeds take 3 weeks to germinate. You have to factor that into your seed starting as well, because that 3 weeks for germination is not part of the 4 to 6 weeks that it needs to grow before being transplanted into the ground. I just want to touch on soil blocking real quick because there's some really cool advantages and disadvantages of soil blocking, and some of it also has to do with timing. Soil blocking advantages: huge space saver. You can fit, I don't know how many soil blocks, but many soil blocks in the size of one plug tray that may be 72 cell or even 210 cell. You can fit a lot more soil blocks in there. You're using less inputs because you're using less media. Generally, soil blocks have faster germination rates or germination times, better germination rates, and faster seedling growth. Another advantage is, you know how in plug trays, roots can also oftentimes get root bound. They can still get root bound in soil blocks if they're left in there too long, but air pruning of those roots gives them a better start in the ground once they're transplanted. But disadvantages of soil blocking: your soil block is a lot smaller than your plug tray cells, and you'll have to water it more often. A lot of people let soil blocks dry out. It happens. A disadvantage of soil blocking too is because those seedlings grow a lot faster, oftentimes you can get stunted seedlings if they're left in the block too long. When you're starting your seeds in seed blocks, if the packet says 4 to 6 weeks in advance, I generally say shave about 2 weeks off of that, because the ones in soil blocks will grow a lot faster. Succession planning. Succession planning happens in both spring flowers and summer annuals. I put a couple examples up here. Your one and done plants, things like stock in the spring and sunflowers in the summer and fall. One stem, you cut it, it's done. So you really want a succession plant, and that means regularly starting seeds or buying plugs. 10 minutes? Okay. Regularly starting seeds or buying plugs so that you can have plants ready for a continual harvest. So in stock, generally every 1 to 2 weeks at the latest, or at the farthest time point for stalk in the spring to give you continual blooms. And sunflowers generally every 7 to 10 days in most varieties. If you continually start those seeds, you will have blooms throughout your season, however long you want them. So one and done plants definitely need succession planting if you're wanting them for more than just a week or two. A lot of plants, especially looking at some summer annuals in particular, they just get tired by the end of the season. Powdery mildew, I'm sure if anybody's grown zinnias, which is a very common cut flower, you've seen powdery mildew. It's the white fuzzy stuff that starts taking over the plants, browning them, crunching, the flowers die prematurely. It's not pretty. So when you have powdery mildew and other diseases, or your plants have just been producing for 2 or 3 months, they just get tired. So you need to be prepared to take those plants out, or at least leave them and not use them anymore, but have more successions coming on and ready to flower for you after that first round gets tired or gets diseased. Zinnias and cosmos are 2 very popular summer annuals that people grow that really benefit from succession planting. And I say generally every 3 to 4 weeks. You can usually get 3 to 4 good weeks out of these plants before they start to show that they're getting a little tired or diseased. And then we have some more fall tasks. Preparing our beds for winter. Season's over, Frostmas has come, the dahlias, the zinnias, all of the tender annuals, they're browned and mushy and gross. It's time to take them out of the field and start preparing your beds for winter. Preparing your beds for winter really looks very different to different people. Everyone's operation is different. A lot of people will add soil amendments. If you do a soil test, which I always highly recommend a soil test, every other year is kind of a good rule of thumb. Soil test and add your amendments in the fall based on what that soil test says that you are lacking. You may have great soil, may not have to add any of those amendments, but if you do, fall is a really good time to do that. Fall is also the good time to soil test. If you haven't soil tested, make sure you do that. If you reach out to your county extension office, they can get you a little soil test kit that tells you how to properly take a soil test, how much soil to get, etc. And then I know in my county, some counties do it. I don't know which counties off the top of my head, but you get so many free soil samples in the month of October. So get in touch with your county extension agent, see what kind of things are out there that you can benefit from. Another thing, in addition to just fertilizing in the fall, a lot of people will add organic amendments in the fall and let those sit there on the field and let those microbes really get in there, let those organic amendments break down. Some of those organic amendments, there's a wide variety of things that can be used. A lot of people will lay out cardboard and wet it down, which biodegrades. Earthworms love cardboard. A lot of people will use leaf mulch or wood chips. Really, you can add compost in the fall. Really just good organic additions to your soil to help build that organic matter and make those microbes happy. If you have good, healthy soil with good microbe populations, you're going to have healthier, more robust plants that are going to be willing to give you better blooms. A lot of people will not leave their field just bare and naked from the fall to the spring as well. Weed seeds will germinate anytime. You know, this polar vortex that we all experienced recently. I had some plants die. In the same hole I had weeds survive. So, you know, that's frustrating. But if you have bare ground, something is going to grow. It's just a rule of nature. If you don't have something growing there that you want growing there, nature will put something there to grow. So cover it so that you're not having a ton of weeds to deal with or weed seeds blowing in over the winter, and you're dealing with that in the spring. A lot of people will use the silage tarps to cover, again, really whatever you have available to you that works best for you. And then another thing that some people do is cover cropping in the winter. That's a really good way to not have bare soil, and depending on your cover crop, you can add nitrogen back into your soil naturally. When there's living roots in soil, you just automatically have enhanced microbiota in the soil. And so that's a really good way to enrich your soil over the winter as well. Nothing else is going to be there in the winter if you're not growing spring flowers or hardy annuals. Put a winter cover crop there, something like winter wheat, winter rye, oats, things of that nature. There's lots of options that can be looked into for that. Adding organic matter back into your soil over the winter while the soil kind of rests. And most importantly, during the off season, be sure you rest and rejuvenate, because we all know that farming, no matter what type of farming that you're doing, it is taxing on the mind and the body. So off season is a time to rest and rejuvenate, and it's also a time to further educate yourselves. There's lots of courses that can be taken during the winter. You can find your favorite cut flower YouTuber and watch a ton of videos, read books, all sorts of things, but really that's the best time of the year to do those things, and that's something that really shouldn't fall off our radar if we're intending to improve ourselves in our operation. A lot of people will focus more on their marketing strategies for the next year in that time frame too, and just doing your crop plan and your operation plan for the next year. There's no better time than winter. Don't wait till spring. You will regret that. So, again, survey. Savannah, when she spoke earlier, she already mentioned some of these resources on the CCD website, so I won't really go into them again, but go to the CCD website and look at cut flowers. There's a whole bunch of really useful resources that UK has put out there, and hopefully there will be a lot more in the near future. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if you need anything. Jot down my email. There's also business cards up here. If you'd like to get one at some point today, please feel free, and don't forget to turn in your survey. It's helping me help you. So thank you.